You know, that highly specific, deeply uncomfortable feeling, that sort of sheer terror that happens when you've been studying something for months.
Oh, absolutely. Like you feel totally prepared in the safety of your own room.
Right. And then suddenly someone asks you to actually perform that skill out in the real world.
And your brain just, decides to pack its bags and leave the building. It's this profound disconnect between knowing the theory of something and actually executing it under pressure.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a wildly universal human experience, whether you're like trying to speak a new language or you have to write code on a whiteboard during a job interview.
Or even just, trying to parallel park while someone is watching you.
Oh man, the worst. It's like trying to upgrade your computer's operating system while you're in the middle of a high-stakes Zoom call. The CPU just maxes out and the whole system completely crashes.
That's a great way to put it.
And today's deep dive is about exactly that phenomenon. We're looking at some source material from the Easy English podcast, which it centers on a highly relatable case study of a language learner.
Right, a guy who is trying to master the past tense.
Exactly. And I want to speak directly to you, the listener, for a second. Because whether you are actively learning a foreign language right now or trying to master some complex professional skill, or you're just fascinated by how our brains process information under stress, this is for you.
Yeah, we're really going to look at how to fundamentally rewire your response to that cognitive panic.
Because that psychological block is a core issue here, right?
It is. The source text gives us this fascinating look at the dynamic through the journey of a learner named Ethan.
Ethan.
Yeah, and we're going to unpack Ethan's story to discover the specific, totally counterintuitive mechanisms he used to start freezing up. Because, overcoming this isn't just about trying harder.
Right, it's not a willpower thing.
No, not at all. It's about completely changing how the brain handles cognitive load.
So let's look at the reality of Ethan's situation, because this isn't someone who is just like phoning it in. Ethan is a highly dedicated student.
He really is. He's putting in the hours every single day.
Yeah, he watches instructional videos.
Yeah.
He listens to conversational audio. He's actively practicing his vocabulary. I mean, he's built a really solid foundation.
And when he operates in the present tense, he communicates just fine.
Exactly. He has the raw materials, right?
Right. He possesses the vocabulary and the grammatical understanding in his passive memory. The knowledge is in there.
But then he hits this invisible, agonizing wall. Like whenever someone casually asks him a question like, what did you do yesterday? Boom.
Complete short circuit.
Yes. He panics. He pauses for this excruciating amount of time, and he just completely loses access to his past tense verbs.
And he involuntarily defaults back to the present tense, right?
Right. He ends up stuttering out things like, I go to work, or I watch TV. And I think the worst part is, the moment the words leave his mouth, he instantly realizes the grammar is wrong.
Which is just awful. He knows better, and that just floods him with embarrassment.
It's like, okay, let's unpack this. It's like having a perfectly organized toolbox, but the second someone asks you to quickly build a birdhouse, you completely forget what a hammer is.
I love that toolbox analogy, because that embarrassment you mentioned, that's actually the biological key to understanding why this happened.
That's the embarrassment itself.
Yeah, exactly. Because when Ethan hears the word yesterday, his brain recognizes a sudden shift in complexity. He realizes he has to perform a new grammatical calculation on the fly.
Yeah.
And that realization triggers a mild threat response in the amygdala. It's basically the fear of social embarrassment.
Oh, wow. So his brain literally perceives it as a threat.
Exactly. And when the amygdala fires, it releases cortisol, the stress hormone. And cortisol biologically impairs the prefrontal cortex, which is exactly where your working memory lives.
Oh, man. So his brain is literally chemically blocking his access to the information he spent months studying.
Precisely. Because working memory has a very limited capacity. You can only hold a few pieces of information in your mind at any given second.
Right, right.
So when Ethan is speaking in the present tense, the cognitive load is light. He just thinks of the action and says it.
But the past tense changes the game.
Exactly. The moment the context shifts to the past, he suddenly has to manage vocabulary, syntax, pronunciation, and apply a completely separate set of conjugation rules all at the exact same time.
And the cortisol is reducing his working memory capacity right when he needs it most.
Exactly. The mental processor just gets totally overwhelmed. And as we see in his case, the brain just abandons the complex task entirely. It defaults to the simplest possible neural pathway.
Which is the present tense. Or even worse, just complete silence, the total system crash.
Yep. He knows the answer, but the biological stress response basically locks the door to that knowledge.
That is so frustrating. So his English teacher, Sarah, steps in to help him navigate this. They meet up at a cafe, and she can see how stressed he is about this specific mental block.
Right, he admits to her that he just doesn't know how to talk about the past correctly.
And Sarah does something really important here before she even gives him any technical advice. She normalizes the struggle.
That's such a crucial step.
Yeah, she smiles and just tells him, finding the past tense difficult is completely normal. It just takes practice.
And by doing that, by validating his frustration, she is actively lowering his affective filter.
The affective filter, what's that?
So it's a concept in linguistics that basically says negative emotions like anxiety, self-doubt, or even boredom act as a literal physical barrier to learning.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah, so by telling him, hey, this is hard for everyone, you aren't broken, she is shutting off that cortisol pump. She's creating a psychologically safe environment.
So his prefrontal cortex can actually come back online.
Exactly.
Okay, so once she gets his brain out of that fight or flight mode, she gives him her strategy. She tells him to stop trying to formulate complicated sentences.
Right. Rely completely on the simplest form of the past tense.
Yeah, she gives him these very bare bones examples like, I watched a movie yesterday, or I visited my friend, I cooked dinner last night.
Very straightforward.
And she pairs these basic verbs with a specific list of time expressions, like yesterday, last night, this morning, last weekend.
She's essentially giving him cognitive anchors.
Right. But here's where it gets really interesting, and let me push back a bit on this.
Sure.
If Sarah tells him, don't try to use difficult English, simple sentences are enough, doesn't that risk making an adult learner feel like they sound, well, childish?
I hear that a lot, yeah.
Because if I'm an adult trying to engage with my colleagues, simple feels like a demotion. Don't we want to sound sophisticated and capable in our professional environments?
It is a very, very common trap. High-achieving adults want their new skills to immediately match the complexity of their native abilities.
Right. You want to sound as smart in the new language as you do in your native language.
Exactly. But Ethan's story teaches us a deeply counterintuitive insight here. Fluency isn't about having a massive, complex vocabulary.
It isn't.
No. It's about radically reducing your cognitive load so you can actually access the vocabulary you already have. By intentionally stripping away those complex grammatical structures, Sarah is lowering the processing requirements of his brain.
Oh, I see. So it's a triage strategy, like stop the bleeding first, worry about the cosmetic surgery later.
That's a perfect way to put it. And consider the brilliance of those specific time expressions she gave him, too.
The yesterdays and last nights.
Yeah. When you start a sentence with the word yesterday, you immediately establish a macro context for the listener. You are signaling to the other person's brain that everything following this word happened in the past.
Oh, that makes so much sense. Because that context is so firmly established up front, the pressure on Ethan to perfectly conjugate every single verb that follows is massively reduced.
Exactly. Even if he messes up the grammar slightly later in the sentence, the listener already knows he's talking about the past. The message survives.
So the communication is 100% successful, even if the grammar isn't poetry.
Right. It goes back to the primary function of language, or really any skill you're learning. The goal isn't to impress people with your technical complexity.
The goal is to successfully transfer an idea from your brain into someone else's brain.
Exactly. I watched a movie yesterday. Might not win a Pulitzer, but it perfectly accomplishes the goal of communication without crashing Ethan's internal operating system.
Once you accept that simple is sufficient, the anxiety just dissipates. The fear of sounding like a beginner is exactly what keeps people stuck as beginners.
Beautifully said.
So Sarah lowers the stakes at the cafe and gives him this strategy. But, an epiphany over coffee doesn't actually rewire your neurons, right?
Sadly, no, it doesn't.
Right. Ethan still has to go home and build the muscle memory. And this is where he develops a highly specific multisensory toolkit to internalize this new approach.
The immersion phase. This is where the biological rewiring actually takes place.
So he builds this routine that attacks the problem from multiple angles. First, every single evening right before bed, he sits down and writes exactly 3 simple sentences about his day.
Just 3.
Yeah, just 3. Like, today I studied English, I walked to the store, I talked to my coworker. He admits these sentences feel incredibly basic at first, but he forces himself to be consistent.
There is a tremendous amount of neuroscience packed into that specific routine.
Oh, really? Let's dig into that.
Let's start with the evening journaling. By writing exactly 3 sentences right before bed, he is taking advantage of sleep consolidation.
Sleep consolidation.
Yeah, the brain transfers information from short-term to long-term memory while we sleep. So by making the simple past tense the very last thing his brain processes before sleep, he's prioritizing those neural pathways for strengthening overnight.
Oh, wow. And limiting it to just 3 sentences is crucial, I bet. If he told himself to write a whole page, he'd probably quit after 3 days.
Absolutely. 3 sentences is a hurdle so low he can't possibly trip over it. It guarantees consistency.
That makes total sense. And then he pairs this daily output with targeted input. He completely surrounds himself with low-stakes English. He starts reading graded short stories designed for beginners.
Which is another brilliant move. He isn't reading dense, complex literature. He's reading simple, relaxing stories.
Why does that matter so much? Like, why not just read the news?
Because narrative context is how the human brain evolved to recognize patterns. When you study a conjugation table in a textbook, it's abstract and sterile.
It feels like math.
Right. But when Ethan reads a relaxing story, he's seeing the past tense verbs used naturally in a low-stress environment. The affective filter we talked about earlier is completely down.
He's just enjoying a story.
Exactly. And his brain is passively absorbing the rhythm and structure of the language without the pressure of having to perform.
He's marinating his brain in the pattern until it feels familiar, rather than forcing himself to memorize abstract rules.
Yes, marinating is a great word for it.
But the walking and talking part of his routine is what really stands out to me. On his evening walks, he listens to conversational podcasts, but he doesn't just listen passively. While he walks, he physically speaks the sentences out loud.
That is the key. That multisensory feedback loop is what finally breaks the paralysis.
How so?
Well, when you just read something silently, you're mostly using your visual cortex. But when you speak it out loud, you engage the motor cortex, which controls your mouth, your tongue, your vocal cords.
And because he's hearing himself speak, he's also engaging the auditory cortex.
Exactly. The more regions of the brain you involve in a task, the thicker the myelin sheath grows around those neural pathways.
So he's literally building physical muscle memory in his vocal tract.
He really is.
And the act of walking provides bilateral stimulation. We know that rhythmic side-to-side movement, like walking, helps the brain process information and naturally regulates the nervous system. It keeps anxiety low.
He's creating an environment where the past tense is completely inescapable, but entirely stress-free. He is teaching his nervous system that the past tense is safe.
That's amazing. But, the journey isn't some magical overnight transformation. Even with this robust, scientifically sound routine, Ethan still messes up.
Of course he does.
Yeah. At first, he forgets the verbs. He still accidentally slips into the present tense. He makes errors.
Which is the most realistic and necessary part of this entire process. Learning is not a clean upward trajectory. It is inherently messy.
But the defining characteristic of Ethan's new approach is that he doesn't stop. Before, a mistake meant failure, which triggered the cortisol, which led to panic and silence.
Right, the system crash.
But now, armed with his teacher's advice and his new routine, a mistake is just friction. He keeps walking, he keeps talking. Small, daily, imperfect practice is actively creating massive long-term improvement.
He's trusting the physical rewiring of his brain over his temporary emotional frustration.
Which is huge.
It is. He has completely redefined what a mistake means. It's no longer an indictment of his intelligence, it's just data. It tells him which neural pathway needs a little more myelin.
I love that. It's just data. Which brings us to the inevitable real-world test. Because all this solitary practice, the journaling before bed, the relaxing stories on the couch, the talking to himself on evening walks, it eventually has to survive contact with another human being.
The true test.
Right. So Ethan is at work, and suddenly, completely without warning, a coworker asks him the exact question that used to shut him down entirely. What did you do yesterday?
The ultimate trigger. The scenario that previously flooded his system with stress hormones and locked up his working memory.
But the outcome is entirely different this time.
Yeah.
The panic doesn't arrive. The tension just melts away. Ethan smiles, and he replies smoothly, without overthinking it.
What does he say?
He says, yesterday I finished work, cooked dinner, and watched a movie at home. The conversation flows naturally, feels comfortable. For the very first time, talking about his past actually feels simple.
And it works because he fundamentally changed the rules of the game.
He didn't try to frantically search his brain for complex vocabulary while simultaneously conjugating difficult verbs.
Exactly. He deployed his anchor yesterday, which immediately established the context for his coworker. Then he relied on the deeply ingrained muscle memory he built during his multisensory walks.
Finished, cooked, watched. Simple, clear, effective.
The cognitive load was so light that his working memory had plenty of room to operate smoothly.
And Ethan's realization that evening is the core takeaway for you, the listener. Sitting at home feeling rightfully proud of himself, he understands that you absolutely do not need perfect, complex execution to communicate effectively.
Perfection is an illusion that only serves to generate anxiety.
Exactly. Fluency, whether in language, in coding, and public speaking, is about accessibility, not complexity. He shared his reality simply and clearly, and he connected with his coworker. The message was received.
He proved that the birdhouse doesn't need to be a complex, multi-story mansion to serve its purpose.
Right. It just needs to hold a bird.
Yeah, and his simple sentences did exactly that. By lowering his own standards for complexity, he actually raised his capacity for genuine human connection.
So we've traced this fascinating journey from the neurological paralysis of cognitive overload to the strategic intervention of lowering the stakes with simple anchors.
And we saw how Ethan utilized sleep consolidation, narrative pattern recognition, and multisensory motor skill building to physically rewire his brain.
And we saw the real-world payoff of accepting that simple is not only enough, it's often superior.
It truly is a blueprint for dismantling any mental block. You reduce the cognitive load, you build a low-stress, consistent feedback loop, and you allow yourself to make mistakes without abandoning the process.
I want to leave you with a direct challenge today, an actionable step based on Ethan's routine. Tonight, no matter what skill you're trying to acquire, find a way to practice it in its absolute simplest form for just 2 minutes.
Just 2 minutes.
Yep. If you're learning a language, write exactly 3 simple sentences about your day before you go to sleep. Use the simplest structures possible. I drank coffee. I read an article. I went for a walk. Lower the bar so far that you cannot fail to step over it. Do it tonight and let your brain process that success while you sleep.
And, if learning to comfortably express our past experiences actually transforms how we connect with the people around us in the present, then mastering the past tense isn't just about passing a grammar test.
It's way more than that.
It is the fundamental mechanism for taking ownership of your personal history, reducing the friction between your thoughts and the outside world, and confidently sharing the narrative of who you are.
That is incredibly powerful. The next time you're pushed into the deep end and expected to perform under pressure, remember that you don't need to immediately execute a flawless Olympic routine. You just need to know how to simply and calmly tread water. Reduce the load, trust the muscle memory you've built, and let the rest happen naturally. Until next time, keep diving deep.